the fabric of American life. The reverse is conspicuously not true. Here in Tokyo's Electronics Center, American products are almost invisible. You won't find a Hoover or an Electrolux here. Last year alone, Americans spent almost $50 billion more on Japanese products than the Japanese spent on ours. When did this pattern begin? And what truly has caused this enormous disparity? Some of the answers may surprise you. August 1945. Hundreds of years of Japanese military imperialism end in a single week. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are vaporized by atomic bombs. Tokyo, though spared from nuclear attack, is reduced to rubble. The Japanese surrender, and within a month, American troops occupy Japan. At American insistence, Japan renounces war and agrees to a clause in its new constitution prohibiting any involvement in future military conflicts. Japan's economic recovery begins slowly, but then in 1950, a new war erupts. The Korean War, and Japan's nearest neighbor is torn apart. The United States, always eager to disarm at the first sign of peace, is caught off guard. The need for military hardware in Korea is sudden and urgent. And so the U.S. Department of Defense orders thousands of trucks from a small, nearly bankrupt Japanese company. Its name is Toyota. And the industrial resurgence of Japan begins. For now, with the Korean War, America confronted a new world enemy. The Cold War focused our attention on the astonishing rise of Soviet military strength, and U.S. foreign policy became dictated almost entirely by the need to counter the threat from Moscow. Japan, the old enemy, now became crucial to the new American strategy. Japan's geographical position was perfect for blocking the Soviet fleet based in Vladivostok from dominating the Pacific. Japan, a dreaded foe just a few years before, quickly became a trusted ally. In 1960, the Tokyo government granted the U.S. the right to establish permanent military bases on Japanese soil. As a result, the Japanese archipelago became, in effect, an unsinkable Pacific fleet for the U.S. And the Soviet threat to the Pacific was effectively neutralized. In 1961, the Japanese built this, the Shinkansen, now the world-famous bullet train. Right now, we're traveling at 140 miles an hour. And as you can see, the ride is safe and comfortable. The bullet train quickly became a streamlined symbol of Japan's rebirth and of this nation's knack for applying the most modern technology in highly practical ways. While the U.S. was rearming, Japan was rebuilding. Japanese goods, once thought of as shoddy and imitative, soon developed a worldwide reputation for quality manufacturing. Americans began buying up Japanese products by the boatload. And Washington encouraged this industrial growth in Japan, even after the balance of trade shifted dramatically in Japan's favor. Minor economic discomfort was viewed as a small price to pay for such a valuable security alliance. But all that is over now, particularly since the Soviet Union is no more. President Clinton's message to Tokyo has been, "It's the economy, Miyazawa-san." Not surprisingly, this change has not sat well with traditionalist Japan. This is the heart of Japanese tradition, Kyoto, Japan's ancient capital and one of the bullet train's original destinations. The city is a picture postcard excursion to the past, recalling with breathtaking loveliness the Japan of old, graceful, serene, and orderly, a nation and a people secure in their heritage and completely isolated from the rest of civilization. The isolation has vanished with the shoguns. In today's Japan, the economy is heavily dependent on export markets, most importantly, the American market. There simply isn't enough consumer demand here to support the growth on which Japanese companies depend. In fact, one of the most striking economic facts about Japan today is the contrast between the continuing growth of the nation's giant corporations and the surprisingly modest standard of living of the average Japanese. Meet Kaoru Mori. He's 40 years old and is the assistant general manager of foreign exchange for the Sakura Bank, where he has worked for 17 years. Mori-san is what the Japanese call a salary man. Though at current exchange rates, he earns the equivalent of $127,000 a year. But his daily regimen is notably short on what Americans would consider the good life. Each day, he spends almost 3 hours commuting to and from Chiba, a suburb of Tokyo. After about a mile of walking, 2 crowded trains, and a bus ride, Mori is finally home. He and his wife, Etsuko, bought their 950-square-foot apartment a year ago for $450,000. On Saturday, while their 2 sons are in school, we go with Kaoru and Etsuko as they look at some larger houses. They could almost afford to buy one like this. That is, if they already owned the land. A lot just large enough to build this home outside of Tokyo would cost at least $1.5 million.
The problem is this house is expensive and the land is expensive in Japan. Altogether, it's too much.
Land is so precious here that even Japan's economic elite live modestly by American standards. This is Dr. Michiyuki Uenohara. He is a prestigious figure in Japanese industry, executive advisor to NEC Corporation, where he has enjoyed a long and successful career. He earns the equivalent of $250,000 a year. Even so, Dr. Uenohara says the only reason he can afford to live in Tokyo is because his wife's parents allowed him to build his home in their backyard.
We cannot do anything about it because the land is so limited.
One regular indulgence that many Japanese do allow themselves is this, sushi, a cuisine that has lately become one of the most popular Japanese exports to the U.S. To many Americans, munching their mackerel and savoring their sea urchin, this is the quintessence of things Japanese. But there are economic surprises here, too. Every year, Japan imports 500,000 tons of fish from, of all places, the United States. So American products are not exactly unknown here, nor do you have to sell fish to tip the import scales in Japan. Truth is, young Japanese are remarkably drawn to American music, movies, and fast food. American pop culture is big business in Japan. In fact, the Coca-Cola Company makes even more money in Japan than it does in the United States. And oh yes, there is one more huge American success story in Japan that you should know about. He is Chad Rowan, known here as the sumo wrestler Akebono. Born in Hawaii, Rowan is the first non-Japanese ever to reach the exalted sumo rank of Yokozuna, Grand Champion. And grand he undeniably is. 6'7" and 473 pounds at last weigh-in. In a land where direct confrontation is usually avoided, at least one American has made it big by throwing his weight around. One of our conclusions in Tokyo was that America's most formidable weapon in the battle to open that country's markets may have to be forged in Japan itself, as long, docile Japanese consumers begin to demand the better standard of living to which Japan's wealth entitles them and which freer trade could help provide. But while we wait for that happy event, our other on-the-road show this year found millions of remarkable average people right here in our own Middle West, rebuilding the region after devastating floods and continuing to construct an economy notable for its diversity and stability. And speaking of enterprise and diversity in the Middle West, our special program from St. Louis found that the latest money-making attraction up and down the Mississippi is really nothing new at all. Yes, riverboat gambling has returned, to the despair of moralists, but the delight of players up and down the nation's greatest artery. This is the Casino Queen, 3 decks of floating gaming rooms. For a $5 fee, you can take a 2-hour cruise. And maybe, if you get lucky, even win your $5 back. Gaylord Ravenel, eat your heart out. One of the special joys of doing this program for more than 23 years is the warm family relationship we've developed with our regular weekly viewers, new and old. I hear from lots of you every week, read every comment, and love to learn what you liked, what you didn't, and sometimes the most fun of all, where you spotted a mistake. Take that innocent night last March when I was reading a viewer question to a panelist. John Dessauer, how would you respond to Philip Chosky of Pittsburgh, who writes me as follows? One of the most famous movie lines of all time was born when Gilberto Rojas, playing a Mexican bandit, said to Humphrey Bogart, "Badges? I don't got to show you no stinking badges." Lately, however, Mr. Chosky continues, I notice that everywhere I go, people are wearing and showing badges. Well, I suppose the badge I was wearing should have read, "Hey, dummy," as I owned up 1 week later. And now, before we turn to some viewer questions, let me report again on what may be the most astonishingly well-informed audience in television history. Last week, a viewer who smelled an investment opportunity in the proliferation of badges in America recalled a famous line about badges in the classic 1948 movie Treasure of Sierra Madre, a line he attributed to Gilberto Rojas. From every corner of the land, coast to coast, Midwest to Florida, came letters saying, "Not so. The Mexican bandit who so memorably derided badges 45 years ago," they recalled flawlessly, was in fact played by Alfonso Bedoya. And by way of setting the record straight for Senor Bedoya, we thought it only fair to call him back for an encore tonight.
Badges? We ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
You folks don't let me get away with anything, do you? And since communication is the name of the game around here, it seems appropriate to wind up tonight with a reprise of our July review of some of the memorable telephones of the past century. It wasn't too many years after Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876 that this turn-of-the-century model was all the rage. It has one feature that many a modern-day telephoner would welcome. Only one person can talk at a time. The trick of getting through to the operator in the early days was all in the wrist, which was particularly useful for crank calls. If the crank on this one didn't work, there was another way of getting the operator, right on the button. And if you got tired of yelling into this 1920s model with its upright speaking cup, I suppose it could always double as a shot glass, or perhaps a bubble bath for hummingbirds. Whereas by the 1930s, there was nothing as appropriate, in or out of the movies, as this candlestick model for shouting, "Stop the presses, sweetheart, and get me rewrite." In the 1940s, this nickel was all you needed to operate this public telephone. It was 2 decades later before the rotary dial was out and push came to shove, as the nation for the first time reached out and touch tone someone. Today, incidentally, with this futuristic model, we've come full circle in terms of telephoning techniques, and now, once again, need only speak the name of the party we're trying to call into the now electronically operated receiver, like this, the White House.
The White House.
Particularly useful for numbers that you have to call several times a day. And anyone who has tried to make a confidential call in a crowded airport will surely be nostalgic for this old-fashioned telephone booth, which not only provided privacy for telephone conversations, but had some other useful functions as well. Oops, wrong show. Don't try this at home. And so it went in a year that ranged from oriental splendor to comic book farce. Were there other events we might have reprised tonight? You betcha. We could have talked about some of the terrific money-making ideas that were recommended on this program this year. But what do they have to do with the holiday spirit? For that matter, we could have talked about some of the lousy money-making ideas that were recommended on this program this year. But tonight, at least, charity before all. Just for 1 week, too, we will refrain from mentioning any of the politicians on either side of the aisle who generally supply us with the lion's share of our most bizarre and implausible material. We wish them all the best. The world of comedy needs them. Next week, though, it's back to normal as we replace Santa Claus with the Marquis de Sade. It's our annual New Year's party. And in addition to switching from this week's sweet milk of human kindness to a decent, medium-priced brut champagne, we're going to reveal the winners and sinners among our stock-selecting panelists. 4 wizards whose picks this past year were dramatically successful will be on hand to tell us precisely where they'll be putting their money in 1994. It's our annual festival of black ties and red faces, and I hope you'll come. Meanwhile, this has been Wall Street Week. I'm Louis Rukeyser, wishing you all the gold, frankincense, and myrrh your heart could desire, all wrapped up beautifully in sublime holiday happiness. And to all, a good night.
Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser is a production of Maryland Public Television, made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the annual financial support from viewers like you, by The Travelers, providing American business with insurance, investment services, and managed health care. The Travelers, America's umbrella. By MFS. MFS, helping mutual fund and institutional investors achieve their financial goals since 1924. And by Prudential Securities. With more than 5,600 financial advisors nationwide, Prudential Securities can help you invest your money wisely. For a printed transcript of this program, send $5 to Transcripts, Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser, Owings Mills, Maryland, 21117. Transcripts are also available to subscribers of the Dow Jones News.
A radioactive gas has been found in homes in your area. It's called radon, and it's so deadly, it's the second leading cause of lung cancer. High radon levels will expose your family to as much radiation as having literally hundreds of chest x-rays in 1 year. But there is something you can do about it. Call to get your radon test information. Radon, the health hazard in your home that has a simple solution.
Proud of yourself. You exercise, eat right, keep informed. You even quit smoking. You look great. But while you're getting yourself in shape, your world is getting out of shape. Protecting the environment begins with you. Conserve, recycle, care, or someday you may find yourself all dressed up with no place to go.
Welcome to Etc. I'm Nancy Kenny, and today's special guests are Carolyn and Phil Bowers. We're LaGrange Park residents. And Carolyn has been a homemaker.
Yes.
And Phil has been an insurance executive, but their real love has been the music business.
Right.
And they both have wonderful stories to tell us. And I think we're going to start with Carolyn. You were one of the, or are, one of the Sherry sisters.
Yes.
And for those at home who aren't familiar with the Sherry sisters, who are a little bit younger, give us a little brief background of what they've done and how they got to into show business.
Well, when I was a little girl, we had a family orchestra in South Dakota. And then in the meantime, as I got a little older, we had gone down to Jacksonville, Florida, and we started singing as the Sherry Sisters. And then we ended up going to on the road with Dean Hudson's band.
Oh, really?
Yes.
They left Lawrence Welk country to go to Jacksonville, and then they had their own radio program and worked in nightclubs there, and were discovered by the Dean Hudson Band, which is one of the best bands in the South.
Oh, that's terrific. And what period of time was this? What years were
I guess it was in 1947, 48, somewhere.
49.
Oh, okay.
It was several years.
After the war.
Yeah, yes.
And I think that we have some film footage that can probably tell us much more about what you've done than just talking about it. So let's take a look at it and see a glimpse of the Sherry Sisters.
I'm Janie. I'm Paula. I'm Carolyn. We're sisters, real sisters. We're sure you can tell. We're happy to be here and sing as well. I'm from Chicago, and so am I, but not me. She's from Carolina, and nothing could be finer, but we sing together in family harmony. Our children have kept us off TV. We're mothers, real mothers, as proud as can be. We never miss the glamour and lights. Our entertainment is family fights. We're sisters and want to sing for you. Boop, boop, doo-doo.
Well, that was fun to see. That gives us an idea of what you did.
I wrote that song, Nancy, in Germany.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Driving around in a rental car.
That
at Carolyn's request. And
well, I mentioned to Phil that I would love to have him write a song about all of we three sisters, because I thought people always like to know a little more about us, and so that's how he.
Yes. Oh, yes. And
we've used it ever since.
Do you still sing with your sisters?
Whenever the one sister comes up from North Carolina, we get together. We just practice and rehearse, or sometimes we sing. Yes, we've made some commercials and cable TV shows, and we were on Jonathan Brandmeier's show.
Yeah, on NBC with
really?
Jonathan Brandmeier.
Yeah,
Yes, that ill-fated show. But
I can imagine Jonathan Brandmeier with you. That must have been interesting.
I think we've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
We like to do that.
Fun. And another thing we mentioned is that you have a big family, and you're a busy homemaker, and while you were working, and tell me about your family.
Well, would you like to know how many children we have?
I would love to know how many children you have.
We have 7 sons, and each one has a sister.
Oh?
Would you like to see a picture of your family?
I would love to see a picture of your family.
So you can believe it?
I feel like something's coming. Something's happening.
Well, I happen to bring it along. I always carry this. I'd like to introduce our family with our family theme song. Carolyn, do you know Lawrence Welk's telephone number?
No, sir.
A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. We have Ron and Danny, Lee and Roger, Jay and Jeffrey, Jim and Polly, and there are children, if you didn't know. We need to fill in. Even trouble has a way to go. We need a Carolyn. Ron and Danny, Lee and Roger, Jay and Jeffrey, Jim and Polly, and when they're sleeping, it's fine and dandy, but when awake, what can we do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a gleam in my eye.
Oh, Phil.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Now you've met our family.
Really wonderful. I've never had anyone introduce their family to me that way. That was great.
It's always the first time, right?
Well,
Yeah.
we're very proud of them. They're wonderful children.
Well, I bet they're very proud of you, too.
Well,
They laugh.
Yeah.
Everyone has a good sense of humor.
Yes.
Well, that's good. Well, we'll talk more about the Bowers when we come back from our break, so stay with us.
I tell you, I've got to start living the simple life.
This is the simple life.
No, I've got too much to worry about. Man-eating, beast inventing the wheel? Cholesterol.
Cholesterol?
Yeah, you think I want to see somebody in my family have a heart attack? We're not Neanderthals.
Keep up with the times. Watch your family's blood cholesterol level. Eat a diet low in saturated fats and cholesterol.
After all, you know what happened to the dinosaurs.
That was cholesterol?
You've taught your children to be polite and friendly, but have you taught them when not to be?
Hi there. Do you live around here?
Uh-huh.
You going to school?
Yes.
Well, I could give you a ride.
Last year, 50,000 children disappeared, many of them from nice, safe neighborhoods.
It's okay. Come on, help me.
Talk to your children about not talking to strangers, and do it today. A message for your child's safety from the American Medical Association.
We're back with Phil and Carolyn Bowers, and that was a wonderful treat to take us out of the first segment.
Thank you.
And you sang about your family, but tell me about them. Tell me about your children and how long you've been married. And
Well, we've been married 42 years, and it seems just like yesterday.
And you know what a lousy day yesterday was.
Well, it's like one of the songs that I wrote, we've been happily married 20 years. Now to 42, that's not bad.
Okay.
We'd do it over again.
Sure we would, Phil. Righto.
Well, you have 8 children?
8,
Yeah.
yes.
8. How many boys and how many girls?
Well, 7 sons.
7 sons and
And
1 girl.
each one has a sister.
Oh, we said that.
Okay, well, see, I didn't get that
Yeah.
at first.
Yeah, that's okay.
I don't know how I missed that.
That's perfectly
but
okay.
That's,
No, and our oldest son is married and has one little daughter, and then our daughter is married, and she has 2 daughters. So we have 3 grandchildren, beautiful, genius, and talented.
Of course. How could they be otherwise? Grandparents like you, it skips a generation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have any children who are musical, who've taken the same interest in music that the two of
Well,
you?
they all love music,
Mm-hmm.
and some play piano. They all did play instruments. Now, more of them are interested in sports and other things.
They all went to local schools, I
Yes,
assume?
they should.
Pines Township.
How did you, briefly, how did you end up here when you've been on the road and touring and doing different things? How did you end up in LaGrange Park?
Oh, that's an interesting story. It was Carolyn's sister was, I don't know, engaged, I believe, to
Someone that lived in Berwyn.
someone in Berwyn who had been with the orchestra too. Incidentally, all 3 of the Sherry sisters married people from the Dean Hudson Orchestra. So,
Really?
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
yeah.
And we're all still married. Oh, that's
They're all
okay.
still married,
Yeah,
right.
that's
Good.
right.
There are probably a lot of
Yeah.
young women out there now wondering how they can meet someone from the Dean
Yeah, but
Hudson Orchestra.
I left the Johnny Long Orchestra at the Capitol Theater in New York to come to Chicago because Carolyn had already come out here. And I said, if we're ever going to get married, this would be the time. So I left we both left the road then and decided to stay here.
Well, you had a very interesting time with a band and orchestra. Tell
Oh,
us
yeah.
about that.
Well, I played trombone from the time I couldn't reach the 7th position. My arm was too short. Now it's longer. See, but I played my way through college with a little help from my parents, and then I played my way through the Army in World War II, and immediately went on the road because it was what I was used to doing, and I enjoyed it. So I was playing in and out of New York, and with Sam Donahue, the last one, and it must be interesting. I went into a musician's tavern to see friends and find out what was going on, and nowadays they call it networking. And another trombone player told me he was supposed to join a band in Philadelphia the next day, the Dean Hudson Orchestra, and he didn't want to go, so he said, would you like to do it? And I said, sure. So I called one number, and next day I was in Philadelphia at the Click Club, and there she was.
Was it love
That was my first contact.
Was it love at first sight?
For me.
Was
yeah.
it? Was it for you, Carol?
Yeah.
Oh! Now
No.
the truth comes out.
That's why I ended up in sales. It took me 6 months to get a date with her.
Oh.
First I maneuvered to ride in the same car after that engagement finished, and we went on the road. I managed to ride in the same car with her, so she got to know me a little bit, and it still took me 6 months.
But he was persistent, so
But
it all paid off.
It was worth
Paid
it.
off.
Yes.
It sure did,
Yeah.
because you've had a long marriage and a big
Right.
family, and what a life together.
Yes, that's true. It's
Yes.
a beautiful life, right?
Yep.
So far.
I go so far.
So good.
So far.
Well,
Well, now, tell us about you had a recent reunion, didn't you?
Yes,
With
well,
the Lee
that-
Williams?
yes, the Lee Williams Orchestra, another band that I had played with, and Carolyn didn't with this one, except on a cruise ship. But that's an interesting story. I took early retirement from New York life, from my manager's job, and I had more time for